look at what my apartment looked like. This is a recreation when I was an undergrad at the University of Colorado. You'll get an idea of the problem. And if you sort out this, I just tried to do a lot of different things. So I had a math major, and math means, in New York terms, infinities, shiminities. Doesn't matter. You can just do whatever you want in it as long as it's consistent in some way. I also majored in molecular biology, and biology means finities, but they are zillionieties because no matter how much you zoom in, you still have trillions and trillions of processes interacting with each other. And I worked my way through school as a programmer at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And computing means finities, but really only millionities, even today. But the catch is that you have to be nature. So in biology, nature has put together these complicated uh, organizations of things. But when you're on a computer, you get to play nature and you have to figure out the complicated organizations. And my minors were anthropology and English, and these tied together with a deep interest in theater. And theater is many, many kinds of things, but it's in the large, it's kind of many, many people of different kinds working together to create what the theater calls a magic mirror. It is something that beams the audience's intelligence back out at them. So it encompasses so much of what makes us human. I spent quite a bit of time there. I was supposed to be working on my majors and minors, but in fact, I spent a lot of it in the theater. And by the time I got done with all of this in 1966, I was exhausted. And I was rescued by accidentally winding up in Salt Lake City at Merrill Engineering Building here and meeting this wonderful.
Okay, okay. Merrill Engineering Building. We'll get back to that. I know we usually start with music, but today I wanted to share this brief clip from Alan Kay. We'll come back to him in many ways in this fireside. And really grateful to have everyone here. We will kick off slowly but surely into the Take Back the Web module 3. I want to offer everyone as they get settled into now the fourth fireside, you know, these are places for dialogue and for us to collectively explore the ideas of the given week's kernel module. And so, as you maybe can already tell, your voices really are what make this special. And so, as many voices as we can have in the mix is what we're going to try to optimize for. Anything that you put into the Zoom chat is meaningful and is a really big part of what happens here. We're halfway through the program in a snap of a finger, but as you all know, the intention for a kernel block is for it to be a slow introduction to kernel and a place that you can return to. So, for example, this week we are preparing for Expo Week. We had the last day to sign up as yesterday, and we've had about 40, at least 40, maybe a bit more people sign up, including 10 or so people from previous blogs, which I point out partially to say that even if you didn't sign up now, I guess number one, let us know if you still want to sign up and still do it if you need to, and we'll figure out if we can pull it off this block, but also to tell you that there are many people from previous blocks who lean back into the expos as time goes on. So it's February 8th. The program started January 12th. We'll have about a month left to go. And it's a really special part in the syllabus because It's kind of like the last module that looks back before we start to look forward. And we've looked back in previous modules at the history of distributed computing, kind of like culminating in Bitcoin. We then went a bit into Ethereum with the modules meaning and value, trying to illustrate that. We went then back into the history of money last week, where we explored money and speech and its local beginnings and roots with Rebecca. And then now this week we look back at the beginnings of the web. And there's, quite a big narrative that starts to come up in 2017 and 2018 as Bitcoin and then Ethereum start to take root, which is this vision for taking back the web. And it turns out that that's like not really a narrative that's unique to 2017. It really is something that comes from well before, and it has its roots in these ideas of locking the web open as a place of cooperation. Um, and we'll get into that as the conversation unfolds. But what's worth pointing out here are kind of the three simple ideas that this module begins with. It says that taking back the web has to do with three related pillars. Number one being augmenting our ability to think for ourselves. Number two being reclaiming our time. And then number three being extending our ability to cooperate. Extending our ability to cooperate. And as the beginning of the module states, it's quite interesting to think about the first two. The first two feel very internal, augmenting our ability to think for ourselves. Number two is reclaiming our time. And there's a big module on that with Douglas Rushkoff right here, where Rushkoff talks about the present time, the initial promises of the internet as being a place where we could take our time back, be in our pajamas all day if we wanted to be, and still do our work, which in large part may be happening. I don't know how many of you are in your pajamas right now, but it's partially coming true. But I think we can all agree that the promise of having all the time in the world has not quite borne out as was promised in the internet. And really it goes back to number three, which is extending our ability to cooperate. So extending our ability to cooperate most obviously is not about um, an individual experience. It's about how we relate and entangle with others. And so um, these three pillars kind of begin the exploration of the module. Um, and the two readings are on freedom and intention. Um, and in the freedom principle, there's the idea of learning our limits in order to find out how we're free. And in the personal principle side, it's considering our intentions first before uh, looking outward into the world. Um, and so I wanted to do two things. I wanted to go back to Alan Kay in a second, but before I do that, I wanted to see if we might start off the chat strong today. If anyone is willing to help with their answer to defining what freedom is and what it means to them.
In the chat?
In the chat, please. And actually, yeah, if you want to verbalize it too, that'd be great.
Well, there was just something that caught my eye that bothered me, but which was that freedom is the which from the text, right? Yeah, which is freedom is the ability to be conscious of the constraints within which you live. And I was just kind of like, is it though? Freedom is the ability to be conscious. Just sounds incorrect. Like I have the ability to be conscious in my prison cell. I don't know if I'm free. So yeah.
Yeah, totally fair. Totally fair. Appreciate that, or and the comments in the chat as well. When gas fees are low is another good thought. Having choice. control of our minds. Internal and external freedoms, I think, or this does remind me of what you're saying as well, because you're right. There's a part of that that has always felt incomplete and has kind of been something we've rubbed up against in many blocks. So I appreciate you verbalizing it. To be at peace, the freedom to and the freedom from, always a nice distinction, John. Thank you as always. Infinite time, infinite time. I don't know of this. I don't know if we have infinite time. Maybe, maybe. To pursue any thought, Pranay, that's nice. Yeah. Access my free. To be free is to be ourselves wholly. Amazing. I don't know how Lonnie got that awesome font too. That's really got my attention. Wonderful. Um, yeah, I wanna go to at least some of the things that are put here. And I agree with or in large part, and I want to hear if anyone else wants to share before we get into the next part. But there's a few different ones in here. The conscious navigation of responsibility has been one that ties perhaps even better for me than constraints within which you've operated. It's something that came up in the Junto yesterday because conscious navigation of responsibility somehow uh, like speaks to constraints and the reality that we have things in the world that we have to tend to manage, things that we are responsible for. Um, but perhaps reframes constraints as responsibilities in some sense. Um, it doesn't speak to the extreme examples, and still I think the external freedoms and internal freedoms um, becomes a really important marker that's brought up in the chat by Alia and or really by your exploration there of like, yeah, okay, like what is the meaning of this in a practical sense? But the beginnings of freedom in this module come from uh, a Buddhist definition, which is described as the freedom of no escape, which is to say that freedom, yeah, it can't be found somewhere else in some other place. It's either here now or not at all. That's kind of that take on the word. Um, so uh, just a beginning and really appreciative of the the different perspectives on freedom in the chat. And we're gonna have 5 minutes or more, probably 10 minutes on kind of like the history of computing, starting with this man, Alan Kay, or at least including a lot of Alan Kay's work. But to explore also intention, which is in this module, I wanted to bring up the end of that same talk that he gave just 10 months ago at the Kaylert School of Computing on his history as a computer scientist and as a human. And he ends with this thought on the fact that we must ensure human wisdom exceeds human power. And so I want to play this really quick and then get us into Grant's presentation.
Three of them that you need in order to be a computer scientist these days. And so if we look at the fundamental fact about predicting the future, it's actually between human ears, and it better not just be involving our brain without the rest of this context, or we're in deep trouble. We have to give the children something much richer in order to grow up in. So the result of where we are today is we can improve most things or we can destroy all of them. And if wisdom means partly more awareness, and larger situations and consequences, then this is one of the great destinies for computing, just as Engelbart said in more than 60 years ago. Computing is partly about helping us be much more aware of our situation and what the consequences of our actions. And to go back to Weihart, this means we must ensure human wisdom exceeds human power. And in fact, we can do that if we choose to. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today.
So this thought was one that just stood out to me, this last
Actions.
portion on ensuring human wisdom exceeds human power, and then the idea that the world of future is between human ears. And what I think about that, when I think about the internet, what I think about is how we are when we are on our screens. And the intention of taking back the web is kind of like a big one. It's a big, heavy one that the Web3 movement has now pushed for 6 or 7 years. So then the question becomes like, how are we doing? And specifically, in what ways can we extend our abilities to cooperate with one another? Those are the practical questions. But I really do like that we've gotten to start with Alan Kay, and I wanted to pass the mic to Grant Hale, who's KB8 fellow, who wants to or has gladly accepted an invitation to talk about how this history of computer scientists has led up to today, and specifically how some of the early computer scientists thought about and talked about computers, so that we might have a richer history of where we come from in terms of the history of computing and what we thought would be possible with these tools, from some of the people who brought them into the world, starting I believe Grant's going to start in about 1945, but we'll see when he comes in. Grant, would love to have you do your introduction, and thank you for taking the time to put it together.
Sure. Thanks, Vivek. Hey guys, I'll be talking about tools for thought, and I can share my screen really quick. All right, so tool for thought, and then predictions worth listening to over the course of computing. And for a quick outline, first going to get into what tools for thought are, what some of the fundamental pioneers' predictions were when it came to computing, who Alan Kay is, why he's important, and then the current efforts having to do with Alan Kay's ideas. So for a quick introduction on who I am, like Vivek said, I'm a KB8 fellow like many of you guys. And the picture on the left is me in Malaysia this summer. I spent a big chunk of time post-college traveling through Asia, and also traveling through a lot of dusty corners of the internet and a few books along the way. And what I realized was that I really like to learn about learning more effectively and the intersections of that with computer science, which was part of my degree, but digging into the history of what people have thought over time, as well as the ideas that people are currently implementing, had me hooked. And that intersection, it turns out, is called tools for thought, and it's something that you'll hear thrown around more, I think, in coming years. And Sid, one of the stewards, I think said it well the other day. He thought that tools for thought would be mentioned by Google or Microsoft in the next 5 years, as kind of a core offering or a core idea of computing. So keep an eye out for that. It also ties into my kernel project, Learn OS, which has to do with incentivizing investment in tools for thought, expanding flashcard softwares, and getting us to examine what we know more often as opposed to consuming more content like we all tend to do. But let's start with what tools for thought are. So tools, thought, it's pretty self-explanatory, but to tie it back to Doug Engelbart, one of the pioneers, we'll get into him, his definition. He looked at computing as a means of increasing the capability of a man to approach a complex problem. I define that a little bit simpler. My dog's busting into the room. a technology that expands and improves our ability to work with and create ideas. So basically allows us to think more effectively. And as technologists, we often think about tools for thought as just software, right? When we go to build something, it comes out as maybe an app, maybe a website, maybe something along those lines. But the gold standards in tools for thought historically have been 1, speaking, 2, writing, and 3, the printing press. They've all allowed us to get new forms of thought and express ourselves in different ways. Although they can also be software as well. On the right, you might recognize a few of those. Anki is on the top left. Obsidian is on the top right. Roam Research, and then Ableton Live for anybody that's into mixing or making music. All those can be considered tools for thought. They allow us to think, put things down on paper, go into new modalities, whether that's audio, it might be Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, things that allow us to think differently and to manipulate ideas that we otherwise would not be able to. So those are how I would define tools for thought and how a lot of people look at them in the space. Now looking at, as Vivek said, some of the pioneers and what their predictions were and what they were thinking at the time. So we looked at this week in the syllabus, Vannevar Bush's As We May Think. That was in 1945. So less than 80 years ago. It's pretty cool considering the number of predictions that he's made and the amount of progress that we've made in that time. So he made predictions around the Memex, right? Like 1 million books on your desktop, around hyperlinking, around wearables, around speech recognition, all things that ended up coming true today and will continue to be developed into the future, but well before they were even possible at the time. J.C.R. Licklider then, he's a name that I wasn't familiar with before I started to look into the history of computing, but envisioned the internet, envisioned interactive computing, and envisioned online retail. And he was one of the guys that made all the funding happen at ARPA. He was the head of the information processing unit. He brought a lot of what we see today into being and is an underheard name. I think he has a building on MIT devoted to him as kind of like a pioneer in the space. And then Doug Engelbart, who still continues to be relevant today. Alan Kay mentioned him. He's a huge influence on him. But he wrote a couple interesting papers. One of them was Augmenting Human Intellect. And he also gave a demo, which people in computer science consider the mother of all demos. It was kind of one of the most exciting demos that's ever been given and blew a lot of people's minds at the time. So what do all 3 of these guys have in common? They all looked at computers in a way that enhanced and augmented our ability to think and our ability to grapple with ideas and solve problems. In other words, tools for thought. So Alan Kay is now at the end of this timeline. He's a descendant of each of these thinkers. And why is he important? What is it about Alan Kay that continues to make him relevant, besides for the fact that he's still alive, which is pretty cool. A lot of these guys have since passed. Alan Kay has a quote, "The computer revolution hasn't happened yet." And it's a bit controversial. It's something that I think the common narrative does not fit with. It seems like today, we have pretty advanced AI. We have like computers on everybody's desktop. We have all these learning technologies, Khan Academy, FaceTime, Zoom, etc. So why is he saying that? He believes that computer as media, so on the far right in potential, computer as media is yet to come to fruition. And what that means is when we're consuming information on our desktop, when we're consuming information on a laptop, iPad, etc., that is coming in the form generally of a PDF or a video, etc., things that have been possible before computing really took over. So what he's saying is that there's new mediums that are still to be discovered, new ways of simulating information that are more interactive, more engaging, more on point with how we could potentially learn and how we could better facilitate questions and thoughts. And those are yet to be developed. Thus, the computer revolution hasn't happened yet. Similar to the printing press copied a lot of existing books at the time, but it took 150 years for people to change their thoughts on the way that they consumed information and the way that they then related to rational thought as opposed to appealing to authority. He's also a big believer in foundational research. So he worked at Xerox PARC, which hopefully some of you guys have heard of. And he's a big proponent that today there's a lot of industrial research, there's a lot going on in big tech, but it's not necessarily foundational research. It's not something that is delayed enough in time to really see the benefits. As PARC, for example, did. They had 5 years where they literally were not allowed to make a product, but they were allowed to just do the research before Xerox was able to commercialize anything. It ended up not being very good for Xerox, but it was great for the personal computer and everything that came along after that. All right, so with those ideas in mind, who's now taking on the gauntlet of what Alan Kay is saying? Where are his predictions going today? Are those predictions worth listening to? Is the question. So starting with two guys, Andy Matuszak and Michael Nelson. I was going to say Andy and Michael Matuszak. They might as well be married. They work together quite a bit. They're both education researchers who have gone deeply into different subject matters and have resurfaced and are now creating interactive medium, a new interactive medium to present that information in a more engaging, more intuitive way. So one example of that is the quantum computing for the very curious on the right. Similar to the kernel syllabus, where there's flashcards embedded into the software, they created what they call a mnemonic medium or a memory medium, something that makes it very effortless to understand and remember what it is that you're reading. So they use spaced repetition flashcards for that. And that's something that I'm experimenting with in LearnOS as well, and something that I've found to be extremely, extremely useful on a daily basis to remember what we read and to remember the things that we want to learn. So those are two guys going down it. The next guy, which was also mentioned in the syllabus, Brett Victor, is somewhat of a protege of Alan Kay. I don't think they've ever worked directly together, but they definitely have talked, and he's directly inherited many of the ideas that Alan Kay espoused, including the simulations and the computer as media form, which we don't see very often. If you look on the far left, that tree, that was a way to create a painting and to adjust the code iteratively in a visual format. On the bottom, you can see he's visualizing an electric circuit, and there's much more information in the visual aspects there than otherwise would be clear just in a traditional paper format circuit drawing. And then Dynamic Land is his most recent, I think in like the last 10 years, he's basically been creating a in-person computer. So like a house or a building where you're able to program in real life. And it's something that takes advantage of our kinesthetic senses, our visual senses, symbolic senses, all the things that kind of make us better able to think and grapple with ideas. And I think he's touched on later in the syllabus as well. And then finally, some more folks here. Maggie Appleton, she's a digital designer. She's done some really cool work with digital gardens and has a beautiful website if you guys want to check that out. We've got some kernel fellows also working on ed tech and tools for thought. Sid, Vince, and Daniel, as well as probably some bunch more people that I'm forgetting and haven't met yet. And then LearnOS is what I'm working on. And there's many, many, many more people in the field. Despite this not being a super talked about area, I think it's up and coming and something that will continue to develop into the future. So quick concluding thoughts here. There was a lot of predictions made roughly 80 to 60 to 40 years ago and continuing to be made today. Many of them were worth listening to at the time. For example, Vannevar Bush or JCR Licklider. But as technologies kind of exploded and those predictions have become less attached to the reality that they were currently in, the people currently making predictions, Alan Kay, Andy Matuszak, Michael Nielsen, etc., they're people that are now more entrenched in what computing can do today and are worth listening to as predictions in the future. So to leave you with a question applicable to each of your guys' field, because clearly mine's not Web3 focused, but a lot of you guys are doing Web3 focused initiatives. Who is making predictions in your field that's worth listening to? What have the predictions looked like in the past? I think those are both interesting and useful questions to ask. And that's all I got. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Grant. Thank you. Lots of great stuff in the chat in response that I may let you catch up on. I wanted to offer maybe Paul Gotti a moment if you're willing, because you referenced Maggie Appleton and also the E.O. Wilson quote. If there's anything that's been coming to mind for you, Paul, that would be awesome. Especially because you've seen this module since Genesis Block with us. If anything stands out in the field, stands out in Web3. Uh-oh. No worries, Paul. Paul's not able to go on. But the reason I was thinking about him is because at the beginning of the Alan Kay video, he talked about the theater and how the theater was something that really inspired him. And Grant expanded on the kind of like technical roots of Alan Kay, the focus on expanding our ability to think more effectively. This is being like a really, really big part of the early computing hopes, expanding our ability to think more effectively. And we can kind of just ask the question, like, in what ways do we feel like the computer has helped with that? And in what ways do we feel like our experience on the computer has hindered that ability? And I find myself personally in kind of like a tug between those two worlds. But I like going back to this idea of the theater, which is put up here as dozens of different kinds of people working together to create a living magic mirror. And when I think about what Grant just shared, I think about how the theater is an example of expansion of our ability to think more effectively in a group setting, in a cooperative, collaborative setting. And that is ultimately the big promise that we're working towards in Web3. So if you have augmenting our ability to think for ourselves and reclaiming our time as two of the kind of initial objectives that are put out here, when you get to this talk in the module by Juan Benet that was in 2018, they're talking about reimagining how we share and relate. They're talking about baking cooperation into the very protocols we use for collecting, storing, and consulting the record, which Vannevar Bush and then later Alan Kay are talking about. So this kind of like I would say innovation in the ways that we might cooperate for Alan Kay and for others comes down to a sense of playfulness in how we approach this shared record of knowledge. And so as we go further into the modules, you see something from Matushak and from Nielsen that also were brought up by Grant. So we have that module right here, which is the Remember module, where we tie together Vannevar Bush's 45 piece with the piece from Nielsen and Matushak in 2019, which is asking the question of how we can develop tools for thought. And in that, they talk a lot about the shared record and specifically the ways that it must be grown, stored, and then primarily consulted. So the ways that we consult the record being the greatest opportunity for cooperation and innovation. Because we have these large data sets, we have the way that they're being presented forward to us, and then now our opportunity is coming up with new and interesting ways to show that data back forward to us. So there's all sorts of stuff about tokens and DAOs and scaling games that come up in the modules to come. But ultimately here, the premise of the Web3 related module is to talk about how this record can be consulted and how we might cooperate more effectively as all of us at this point being technologists, people who use computers on a regular basis, our role being consulting our records in more humane ways that expand our ability to think more effectively. So I want to open it up with that and see if that kicks off any conversation. We can kind of go any direction. And I definitely want to make sure we get back to freedom and intention, especially if Orr is willing at some point to come back in and see how some of the rest of the conversation flows through, and if there's anything from what we've talked about that gets things going. So anyone who had any questions for myself, any questions for Grant, or any, more importantly, seeds for dialogue would be great. David, would love to hear from you, please.
Hey guys, I was thinking about the whichever computer scientist you were talking about with the house or the room, right? Like the multimodal one, and a question I've been kind of meandering about recently is, right, as we see like this computing technology becoming more and more kind of part of us, right? Like on the path towards, we'll call it cybernetics. One of the questions I debate is whether you should be leaning fully into it, right? Like accepting that this is going to be, like, you are forever going to be more and more tied in with computing, and you actually might as well do the equivalent of uploading your brain into all the tech you have now at the cost maybe of your ability without those computers to function as you would? Or do you try and resist and kind of keep it? Or do you, like, how people kind of think about striking that balance?
Good question. I like that. Thank you, David. Dave, thanks for.
Hey guys. Yeah, good chat, and thanks Grant for the short presentation at the start. I'm loving this week's module. I think listening to when Grant was speaking, I was thinking of another quote from Steve Jobs that often definitely influenced me early on, which was, I think, the computer is like a bicycle for the mind. And this idea that with this computer, we are now able to, move faster and do more than we could do before. And just thinking about this idea of connecting back to freedom and thoughts. And I think there are certainly definitions or perspectives to freedom which are linked to thinking, but in fact are linked to disidentifying with our thought and almost certain states of mind where there is no thinking. And it's this freedom that arises from the absence of thoughts, where thoughts are everything from the past. So everything you've put in from the outside world, what people have told you, and so are constricting, in that sense, what your actions and thinking are, because it's always based from the past. So there's this idea of, if freedom is coming from a place where our thoughts are playing less of a role in how we're directing our actions, then it sort of makes me think about these tools for thought in a different light. And there's a wonderful story actually from one of the early Taoist scholars called Zhuangzi. And he tells this wonderful story, which I'll briefly share, where he talks about a man walking up to a field and he sees a farmer, and the farmer is sort of watering his field, toiling away back in, ancient China. And the man walks to the farmer and says, like, what are you doing? Haven't you heard of this new technology that allows you to water the fields just from standing in one position? And the farmer sort of responds to the man and says, I've heard of this. You think I'm silly. I've heard of this technology. but I'm wary of developing. I think the Chinese word he uses jishin, which could be translated as like a machine heart or a calculated mind. And I think that sort of translation, I think, cuts in really well, where this idea of I'd rather not develop this calculated mind and instead be free to sort of be more in present in the moment, which again connects back to, I think, one of the, this week about being present and being in the now and sort of reclaiming our time. And so I'm thinking of like today we have our phones and our computers and we can essentially water all our fields from where we're sitting right now. But what have we lost in that? And so that's just a question I put to all of you. Like, how do you feel you've maybe lost your freedom to think, or just your general capacity to imagine and think beyond everything you've heard before?
Love that. Thank you for sharing the story, Dave. That's awesome. Or would love to hear from you.
Yeah, first of all, I really enjoyed that little bit because I think about this a lot, and I don't remember exactly what the quote was, but there was a bit there where they said something like, "Freedom isn't an end; it's a means. It's supposed to be an enabler. It's not like the goal necessarily." And I think that kind of in relation to the machine heart, or maybe something that I maybe see less of now in Web3, but was very present in the beginning, was this kind of, we were all really in love with this idea of blockchain and this technology. Like, isn't it exciting? Like, look at all this stuff that it allows, that we got so caught up in a sense as as a movement even with like the technology, but really it's not about the technology. It's about the people who are using the technology and the kind of relationships that allows. And I think that the really successful, not that there's that many, but honestly, the successful DAOs were the ones that were uh, human oriented, that were about kind of what is the thing that we're doing, and it just so happens to be using this technology, which enables it to be free, or like it enables more. It enables that group to do more. And I think of that a lot. Kind of, the technology is super interesting, but it is a means. It's a tool. And so I pulled up the quote, a different quote, which I think was really powerful, from Tyson Yunkaporta, which is, kinship mind is a way of improving and preserving memory in relationship with others. If you learn something with or from another person, this knowledge now sits in the relationship between you. And I feel like that's kind of like, isn't that the point? Like, that it's actually about the relationships, the people, the things that we're doing with these tools. And that's actually what also stays with us, the feeling that we get from being a part of that kind of community or group or work or whatever it is. So yeah, so I don't know. To me, all that is connected to everything that was said before, but it's kind of just like this, like, let's remember that there's like a human aspect to all of it.
Yeah. It's like it is a deeply technical exploration of the human aspect, though, which I really appreciate. If you can share that kinship mind quote, that's awesome. That's where the syllabus, or that's where you got, because I find that experience happening to me often around kernel. I've said it to somebody in one of the one-on-ones we've done, where like my memory seems to have improved in kernel, and it's because I used to think I have a bad memory, but then I realized that I can remember things a lot better if I remember who I sent them to or who sent them to me. And when I get information from, let's say, the black box, it's a lot harder sometimes for me to place it, but I will very rarely forget if somebody sent me a very well-timed thing in a well-timed place. And I think that is a really powerful reminder, the kinship mind part of things. And perhaps maybe like in some ways, I think everyone has had some responses to David's idea or thought between cybernetics, whether we should put our information into the machine, connect to it or not. I think both of Dave and Or's responses have something to say about that.
Can I jump in? Sorry, I wasn't sure if there's a line of people. Hi, or what you mentioned reminds me of the Scott framework or social construction of technology theory, kind of within like science and technology studies, and essentially like people bring up that point, right? Is that in which I noticed a lot in Web3, how people get so caught up in like the technology, but what really matters is that the stakeholders behind it. It's not enough to know some technical characteristics, right, to explain technological success, or because it's like provides the best technical solutions. Like what matters is the participants who define it, and those like social relations that you were talking about. And I totally feel that. And it's funny because it kind of reminds me of the recent conversations I've had around Web3, where people were united by this idea that what they enjoy about it is not so much the technical, it's actually the kinds of cultural connections that they establish in the ecosystem, which is kind of like ironic, right? We're here to talk about technology, but what people really like is the social relationships that come out of it.
If you can put more about Scott in the chat, Maya, that's awesome. Social construction of technology. There it is. Perfect. That's incredible. Cool. Maybe a quick second to go back to Grant, if you're willing. I'm curious how some of this has resonated with you and how you're thinking about, Learn OS.
Yeah, I think David, I liked your point about and I like all the points around humans being kind of the goal, and it's so easy to forget that when we're creating technology. The goal, I think, of dynamic land is twofold. It's one, to kind of like break the idea of technology as a screen where we have just like a phone or like a laptop screen in front of us, but to make it more holistic and collaborative, where children can be learning together, and you can be interacting with your environment in a more fun or visceral way. The Vision Pro just came out, obviously, so that kind of raises a lot of questions. I've been seeing a lot of memes on Twitter around people just having the headsets on and being totally isolated from each other. So it is, I don't know, I don't have a ton of thoughts about what the answer is, but I do like the idea of promoting computing as being an in-person event, and continuing to be collaborative, as opposed to I guess the trends that I've seen are just like people being on computers and interacting. We're interacting on Zoom on a computer, but then a lot of people are just like heads down knowledge workers, just working on what they have on a daily basis and not promoting collaboration. So I like the idea of breaking the boundary of the screen and looking at computing in that social framework in general. Half-baked thoughts, but that was my thought.
Good. Half-baked environment around here. Design. Cool. Share more on dynamic land in a second, but cool. Anyone else, feel free to jump in if you have anything.
Hi, Vivek. This is Colleen. I thought I'd just jump in with an old school thought, probably, which is before I got into Web3, I read Ministry for the Future, and I'm really into climate. So I think I was more into Web3 tech when I had the chance to get involved, because I had read the sci-fi book. So in a way, it's a tool that expanded my thought and my possibilities, predicted the future, because so much of what's in there that Kim Stanley Robinson researched and started talking about is really coming to fruition in Web3, such as identity, maybe identity that can be transferable for like climate migration, people who have to leave their countries and then suddenly are like, stuck in refugee camps, local currencies, biodiversity credits, things like that. Like, it blew my mind when I read it. It was only a few years ago, but now I'm like working in that world. So as a tool for expanding our ability to think more effectively and to grow ideas and maybe predict the near future, I think sci-fi is pretty valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a really special group of people that have come through kernel studying cosmotechnics, and one of whom is studying their PhD in modern theory and literature with a focus on sci-fi, and it's been really special to use that as a place in kernel to go deeper. So thank you, Colleen, for bringing that. I wanna like really touch on this part of Lock It Open. In the past, in this module, we've had Brewster Kahle from the Internet Archive come, and he, in many ways, was contemporaries with a lot of the folks mentioned, definitely Engelbart and others, and it's referenced in this module. If I go back at the bottom here, we've had Brewster and Mai Ishikawa Sutton was in KB7. We had Juan Benet, who was kind of the reference point for this talk. We've had Eva Balin from the Graph, and then Sam Williams from Arweave. And so all of them have had perspectives. Juan, Eva, a bit more as it relates to their Web3 projects. But with Brewster, it was really nice because it was a return to like this back, looking back. And he, if I control F here, talks a lot about a globe of villages, not a global village. Distributed systems lending themselves well to local culture and genuinely civic spaces, both online and offline. And this to me it really ties to the most important point that I think Grant had made in my kind of like what I'm thinking about is that the opportunity here is for new educational mediums, and new educational mediums that specifically put us back into these sensations of being in global villages. I think it's a pretty clear and simple goal that you could have for the internet, that the internet could be a place where people know your name, but it isn't in most places right now. And if it were to return to that, and to use Orr's reference to kinship mind, if the internet did do a better job at returning to a place where we're in spaces where people know our names, that in itself feels like the chance for this type of new educational medium on the internet. And so this is the big kind of like interesting spot, I suppose, for the module to sit, because it has, references to things like Arweave and the Graph and Filecoin and all of the different Web3 technologies, but tries to ground in this idea that is just an idea, but an idea that was native to a lot of the early internet pioneers, which is this idea of maintaining local and local culture within global connectedness. So I want to call that out. And also, if you get to the end of this Juan Benet YouTube video, you find Tim Berners-Lee reference there, where it turns out this whole idea of Web3, although now co-opted and used a lot in crypto circles, was something that Tim Berners-Lee was talking about as early as 2004. He was interested in getting to what he was calling the world of linked data, where you could arbitrarily structure content from across the variety of websites that you would find. So if you look at this image closely, there were Flickr pictures and YouTube videos and encyclopedia articles. And the hope with the linked or semantic web was that you would have basically a bunch more options in kind of putting those pieces together and doing it in such a way that we would be able to create, again, more locality on the internet, more local memory trails, let's say, that mattered to individuals within the broader spectrum of the web. So this is the pocket, I think within Web3 that kernel probably is most specifically focused on is these types of educational medias that are about putting you into small groups, basically, that you can learn alongside on the web. And in the future modules, there are explorations to maybe to Colleen's point of, okay, when you take those types of ideas and then apply them to things like biodiversity credits or local currencies, what does that mean if those groups have infrastructure that supports them in creating this local feel within a global context? What does that start to do? So yeah, I don't know where that leaves us necessarily, but that's some of my thoughts. I'm curious if anyone else has anything. Doesn't have to be on that. Renee, please.
Hey, hi guys. Hey, so I wanted to mention, I wanted to actually elaborate on my point here, which Grant actually started with. I think, future predictions, like what is possible and all. So I think in the 1960s, there's this thing called Moore's Law, right? What Moore's Law basically states is that the number of transistors that can be fit into like a computer chip, right? So every 18 months and 2 years, that the number of chips that you can fit into a transistor doubles, right? So over the last 40 years, the number of transistors have doubled, and that is why we have all of this technology and all of this innovation in computing power and all, right? So a similar type of narrative is building up in zero knowledge, which basically enables trustless computing and uh, trustless primitives of decentralization. So their proving times of zk proofs, basically they are going down by, basically they're becoming half every, I think every 14 months, which is crazy. Because if this holds up for, let's say, another 3-4 years, right? And we're already at like billions of proofs, right? And if this holds up for a few more years, we could see a lot more, these primitives that we keep talking about, that basically form the base of freedom and privacy and culture, all of those things. I just wanted to mention that.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. We should do more on zero knowledge as the weeks go on. It's just such an exciting branch. It's true.
Yeah.
Some questions in the chat if there's any DK references that you have.
Yep. Did everybody get the dimension airdrop?
Maybe not everybody. Okay. Don't mean to put anyone unnecessarily on the spot, but I mentioned John about Kia and the mediums of memory. I think that's just like such a wonderful thing to potentially bring into the conversation. And then I see really nice chat between Dean and Pati and Io on sci-fi. Curious how, if you see any ways that sci-fi has shown a future in terms of cooperation, in terms of healthier forms of cooperation, especially. Arrival? Why arrival, Jess? And this is a shout out for Jess's film club potentially happening in kernel Slack. Oops. Yeah, Arrival's a really, really great movie. Let's see.
I just wanted to riff because I think like science fiction as a concept, Dean communicated these three modes of thinking, doing, and being. And the notion of science fiction is getting at a particular kind of imagination where you can kind of see how all these three modes interact, especially when we imagine what the future is, like the future of being and all these things, and how technology can kind of give us hope for new ways of being. And I think it's really cool and beautiful. And another thing I wanted to riff on too is memory. Um, Memory is a notion of continuity. And in some ways of framing it, memory, the transition of going from short-term to long-term memory requires an affective component, an emotional component. So across these different modes, the idea of continuity in each requires some aspect of the other and what permits a continuity from one moment to the next. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I like that idea about emotion involvement in learning, and Vivek, what you said earlier around like community or people facilitating you remembering things better. I think that's like a lot of people, myself included, at points have felt like I don't have a good memory, but then understanding kind of like what enables you to remember something, or like there's like all those light bulb moments in our life where like, oh my God, I can remember this in detail, and who knows if it's like a false memory at this point, but I think emotion is a major player in that, and I felt that in kernel even. And me and Sal and David were talking about it in the like learn session yesterday. How I think the syllabus, like if we saw kernel on the web, and there's all this cool information in the syllabus, each of us or myself probably would have read maybe like one essay and then kept moving because there's an infinite number of like websites, and it pulls you in so many different directions. But to have the community around it has been such an empowering move towards learning and remembering the content and interacting with it. Kind of in that global village idea of like this community is a village, and we're all a piece of it together, putting in different perspectives and knowledge.
You caught the master plan, Grant. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I want to, I mean, the point between short-term memory and long-term from Johan and that effective mode, if I think I heard that correctly, it it uh it ties to, yeah, this idea of emotion, and emotion being a big part, and being, I suppose, being a big part. So there's thinking, doing, and being that Dean brought up in the chat. Being the part that's often lost on the internet, let's say, like thinking and doing. You're thinking a lot of times, you're in your head, you're doing a lot of times, you might be typing. But you lose a sense very quickly of your body and how you are, and how you're being. Not to say that the more effective mediums down the road might be better at having us being. And I do think that's been some of the early reviews we've heard of the Vision Pro, is that for their downsides as a computing platform that exists from the big goggles that are on your face, there is a higher emphasis on being in that triangle. And that has proven to be interesting for some of the early users from what I can see. But this effective transition from short-term to long-term memory, especially in terms of the things that we want to remember and we want to learn, I love the idea that there's an emotional reason for those things to move, and that really friends or learning with friends or developing relationships alongside the learning is what oftentimes encourages that transition. Yeah. Okay. We probably have about 5 minutes. I don't know if Or you had something, so I didn't mean to unmute you. We have about 5 minutes and then we would transition to gather. So if anyone has anything else, I know there's lots still coming through the chat. Love to
I
hear.
was just gonna chime in for a second, Vivek. I think and then tuned in a little late, so missed the front end. So apologize. Look forward to hearing the recording and hearing more about Grant where we started. But all this talk of sci-fi really has me thinking about how sci-fi just begins to paint these potential futures for us. I think unfortunately so many of them are very dystopian, but I think the practice of really placing ourselves in the future and the possibilities of the future really have so much power in creating a future we want to live in. I think so many times we spend so much time more in the past and maybe at best in the moment, but to really place ourselves in the future and really spend those times of imagining what the future might look like if everything turns out okay. I think the more of us that can dream and imagine those sci-fi realities, the better. So um, that's, I guess, what's coming up for me.
If I can jump in real quick, because I think the tricky or the interesting part about our time is how what John just shared, take the word compute in the imaginal sense, right? And when we're talking about affect, we don't usually think of affect as a type of computation. We tend to think of computation in terms of just the cognitive, but the reality of how complex we are, we have like the cognitive aspect, the emotional aspect, and the somatic aspect all happening at the same time. And the way that interacts, seeing that as computation, I think is part of like what it means to produce humane technology or things that resonate with what it means to be this weird mammalian thinky thing that can imagine the future and put it into practice.
I don't know if we could end on a better thought than that we are a million thinky things and are able to put these pieces together in interesting ways. Thank you, Johan, and everybody. As always, the conversation flows through many places, and would love to continue it with anyone who wants to. Next week, we'll return to having some guests, and our top pick has been referenced in this chat, so we'll see if we're able to pull it off. Thank you all for spending time. If you want to hang out and gather for a few and debrief further, we'll be in there for at least the next 20 or so. Expo is next week, so we have kind of a quieter week of programming except for Expo. We hope that you all can prepare well. We're going to invite everyone who wants to be there on Monday for experimental learnings. And in experimental learnings, it'll be just kind of like a dry run type format for anyone who wants to come and kind of like give their 3 or 4 minute storytelling a go. And yeah, that's next week. That's, the halfway point, really. We're not quite there yet, but we'll get there over the weekend. And on the way forward, the modules start to look ahead. And that starts with really the expo itself and the work that each of you is doing, and then moves forward through that in large part. So take care, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.